The chalk snapped in half. It wasn't loud, not like a slammed door or a shouted insult. It was the smallest sound, a sharp crack. But in that charged silence of the Lincoln High mathematics classroom, it might as well have been thunder. 30 pairs of eyes flicked instantly to Ethan Bennett's trembling hand, frozen mid-motion at the blackboard. The stub of chalk remained pressed against the dark green surface, leaving a ghostly white smear where it broke. Ethan swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his pulse hammering inside his chest so fiercely it hurt. He could feel the weight of the stares, the smirks forming, the suppressed giggles ready to burst at his expense. His shoulders hunched in, as though trying to make himself smaller, invisible. He had been here before, standing in front of this very class, fumbling through answers, stumbling over words, enduring the laughter that always followed. But today was different. On the board above the fractured chalk was something monstrous, an equation scrawled in bold, taunting symbols. Z's equals 0, R's equals 1/2. The Riemann Hypothesis. A problem so legendary that entire generations of mathematicians had battled it, and none had truly conquered it. A problem connected to the mysteries of prime numbers, the building blocks of mathematics. To the world, it was one of the greatest unsolved riddles. To Ethan's classmates, it was gibberish, written there for one purpose: humiliation. It hadn't been Ethan who put it there. That honor belonged to Mr. Patterson, the stern, silver-haired teacher with a habit of sharp sarcasm and little patience for daydreamers. Frustrated by Ethan's blank stares earlier that morning, Patterson had flung the challenge onto the board with a mocking flourish. "If you're so lost in your head, Bennett, perhaps you'd like to solve something real. Let's see you handle this." The class had erupted in laughter. "Yeah, go on, genius," someone jeered from the back row. "Show us the magic trick," another called. Ethan had felt the blood rush to his ears, his heart sinking. He hadn't planned to stand. He hadn't planned to move at all. But when Patterson stepped aside, arms crossed with that cruel smirk, something stirred inside Ethan. His feet moved almost on their own. He rose from his desk, shuffling past rows of wide-eyed students, each one waiting for a disaster. And now here he was, standing in the crossfire of expectation and ridicule, holding broken chalk like the snapped stem of a weapon he didn't know how to wield. The silence thickened. "Well?" Patterson's voice cut through the air, dripping with disdain. "Are you going to enlighten us all? Or should we assume the rumors are true, that numbers are as lost on you as everything else?" A ripple of laughter traveled across the room. Ethan's eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Not here, not now. Instead, he closed his eyes for half a second. Behind the blackness, behind the shame, he saw them again. The numbers. They weren't cold marks on a page for him. They moved, they pulsed, they whispered. In patterns, in music. The primes especially. They were never random, not to him. They were like stars in the sky. Scattered, yes, but forming constellations if you only knew how to look. And the Riemann Hypothesis? It was more than an impossible wall. It was a melody waiting for someone to hum it aloud. His breath steadied. When he opened his eyes, Ethan didn't look at his classmates. He didn't look at Mr. Patterson. He looked only at the symbols on the board, and for the first time all day, he wasn't afraid. The chalk scratched faintly as he moved his hand. At first, his lines were hesitant, halting, as if testing the ground before stepping forward. A few confused murmurs rose from the room. To most of the students, it looked like nonsense, but soon his movements grew bolder. He wrote sequences of primes, then mapped them against curves, spirals, notations that no one recognized. His hand flew faster, chalk smearing his fingers white. It didn't look like the clean mechanical proofs from the textbook. It looked like art, wild, messy, and alive. Symbols curved like notes on a staff, connections arched across the board like threads in a web. To the untrained eye, it seemed chaotic. but Ethan could see it. The hidden rhythm. The balance of it all. Behind him, the classroom transformed. The laughter died away. Chairs creaked as students leaned forward. Whispers turned to silence. "What's he doing?" a voice finally breathed. "Making it up," someone muttered back, though their tone lacked conviction. Mr. Patterson's arms slowly unfolded. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. He had given the problem as a joke, an insult, not an actual assignment. Yet what he saw was not random scribbling. It was structured, deliberate. Ethan's heart pounded, but for the first time, not from fear, from focus, from flow. He was no longer the fool being mocked. He was the conductor of a symphony only he could hear. Every stroke of chalk released another note of the hidden melody. His classmates didn't understand the math, but they understood the change. The boy they had dismissed, ridiculed, ignored. He was different here, in front of the board. He was alive. His awkwardness burned away in the fire of his strange brilliance. Finally, when his arm ached and his breath came in shallow gasps, Ethan stopped. The board was covered edge to edge with his strange, luminous web. He turned back, eyes low, his voice barely audible. It works. You just have to look at it differently." The silence was deafening. Some students blinked in confusion. Others stared wide-eyed, unable to find words. For the first time in years, no one laughed. Mr. Patterson, hands trembling, stepped toward the board. His gaze scanned the messy proof. He muttered half to himself, This is unconventional, but it holds. At least in this case. Good Lord, it actually holds." Gasps echoed across the classroom. The boy they had all written off, the fool of Lincoln High, had just brushed against one of the greatest unsolved problems in mathematics. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Bennett felt the heavy stares not as weapons, but as recognition. The memory of that day at the chalkboard would stay with Ethan forever, but its roots were buried deep in the years before. The years when no one believed in him, when he was the quiet shadow of Lincoln High School. Ethan Bennett had always been different, not in the way that won medals or praise, but in the way that drew whispers, laughter, and sighs of disappointment. A boy out of step. From the very beginning, Ethan never seemed to walk in rhythm with the world. While other children ran across playgrounds chasing balls or giggling in packs, Ethan sat in the dirt tracing shapes with his fingers, triangles, spirals, sequences of numbers he couldn't yet explain. He didn't laugh at the same jokes, didn't join the games, didn't talk much at all. Teachers mistook his silences for slowness. When asked questions, Ethan often froze, his thoughts tangled, words crawling reluctantly from his mouth. "He's a bit behind," they'd say at meetings with his parents. Perhaps special education might suit him better. By middle school, the labels had begun to stick. Weirdo, dummy, lost cause. Children are quick to find weaknesses, and Ethan's reluctance to fight back only made him easier prey. He would lower his eyes, clench his fists in silence, and pretend not to hear. But he did hear. Every word sank deep. Numbers as music. What no one understood was that Ethan wasn't ignoring the world. He was hearing another one. To him, numbers were not lifeless symbols. They were alive, vibrating with hidden music. Prime numbers especially fascinated him. He saw them not as scattered islands, but as stars in a sky forming secret constellations. While his classmates groaned over multiplication tables, Ethan was sketching spirals that linked primes into patterns. At night, lying on his bed with a battered notebook balanced on his knees, he would listen. The primes hummed to him. 2, 3, 5, 7. He felt their rhythm like a heartbeat. 11, 13, 17. They marched like a drumbeat, steady but mysterious. And beyond them, Higher primes sang in soaring melodies, chaotic yet strangely harmonious. If someone had asked, Ethan could never fully explain. It wasn't logic in the ordinary sense. It was feeling. Where others saw chaos, he felt design. Where others gave up, he pressed deeper. But no one asked. Home shadows. Life at home was not cruel, but it was heavy. His father, Daniel Bennett, worked double shifts at a warehouse, lifting boxes until his back ached. His mother, Caroline, worked part-time at a diner, her hands raw from soap and dishes. They loved Ethan, but they were tired. "Son," his father would say, slumping into a chair after work, "you've got to focus on real life. These doodles won't pay the bills." Ethan would nod, clutching his notebook closer. "Yes, Dad." But late at night, when the house was quiet, he would sneak a lamp under his blanket and scribble page after page of symbols. He filled entire notebooks, hundreds of pages covered in spirals, equations, connections no one else could see. His mother sometimes found them and smiled weakly. "You're creative, honey, but you've got to keep up in school, too." Ethan didn't argue. He couldn't. He just returned to his numbers, the only place he felt understood. The mockery. By high school, the teasing had grown crueler. Lincoln High was a place where image mattered. Football stars, cheerleaders, and class clowns ruled the hallways. Ethan was none of those things. He walked alone, spoke softly, and carried notebooks instead of sports gear. "Hey, fool!" someone would call across the hallway. Laughter followed like a chorus. "Hey, Bennett, how many fingers am I holding up? Can't figure that out, genius?" "Betty's drawing his little shapes again." Ethan never fought back. He lowered his head, gripped his books tighter, and walked on. Fighting would only make it worse. Silence was his only shield. But every insult, every shove into lockers, every cruel laugh etched deeper lines into him. To the world, he was invisible. Or worse, a joke. The teacher's disappointment. Even teachers lost patience. Mr. Patterson, who would one day set him the impossible problem, had long since given up. "Bennett," Patterson barked during one class, "what is x if 2x plus 4 equals 10? Ethan froze. The answer was simple, 3, but his mind was far away, tracing the relationship between square numbers he had scribbled earlier. He stammered, face hot. The class erupted in laughter. Patterson's mouth hardened into a thin line. "For heaven's sake, Bennett. This is freshman-level algebra, not rocket science. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Ethan obeyed, cheeks burning, and doodled quietly in his notebook the rest of class, drawing connections between prime gaps instead of focusing on the lesson. Mr. Patterson shook his head. To him, Ethan wasn't a prodigy. He was a failure. The lonely notebook. If anyone had opened Ethan's notebooks, they might have realized the truth. Inside were not scribbles but intricate maps of numbers, spirals linking primes, conjectures written in shaky handwriting. Prime gaps follow a pattern, like rhythm beats. Zeros of zeta-like vibrations on a string. The primes are not random, they sing. But no one looked. His notebooks were his secret world, his only refuge. He poured himself into them because he couldn't pour himself into people. And yet, deep inside, Ethan dreamed of being understood. Just once. A glimpse of genius. There was one moment, one small, fleeting moment, when someone almost noticed. During sophomore year, the school hosted a math contest. Ethan didn't sign up, but he sat in the back, scribbling solutions for fun while others struggled. One problem asked for the sum of a complex sequence. The official solution involved tedious algebra. Ethan, however, sketched 3 lines: elegant, simple, and complete. The proctor, a visiting professor, noticed and frowned. "That's unusual. Where did you learn that?" Ethan stuttered, eyes down. I just saw it. But before the professor could press further, another student shouted, "He's cheating! He didn't even show the steps!" Laughter broke out, drowning the moment. The professor, distracted, moved on. Ethan tore out the page and stuffed it deep into his bag, face burning. His chance vanished like smoke. Shadows into present. By the time junior year arrived, Ethan had grown used to his role. The fool. He sat in the back of classes, quiet, unnoticed. He let the names bounce off him. He carried his notebooks like armor. But inside, the fire burned. Numbers never abandoned him. They sang louder than ever, filling the silence that people left behind. And then came that morning in Mr. Patterson's class. Ethan had been lost in thought, sketching prime spirals in the margin of his notes, when Patterson's sharp voice cut through. "Bennett, if you're so fascinated with your scribbles, perhaps you can solve this." And with a flourish, Patterson scrawled it across the board. The Riemann Hypothesis. The impossible. The class roared with laughter, already anticipating Ethan's humiliation. But Ethan had risen. Slowly, almost involuntarily, drawn not by pride but by the irresistible pull of the numbers themselves. He walked to the front. He took the chalk. And the rest was history. The chalk felt brittle in Ethan's hand. Tiny grains of white powder clung to his fingertips, dusting his knuckles as if even the chalk was unsure he could carry its weight. For a moment he hesitated, his body frozen, the classroom thick with anticipation. Behind him, whispers buzzed like bees. He's gonna screw this up. Watch him draw his little shapes again. God, this is gonna be hilarious. Mr. Patterson, arms folded, stood like a judge at trial. His eyes were sharp, his mouth set in a thin, disbelieving line. He had expected Ethan to fold, to stammer, to fail in spectacular fashion. That was why he had chosen the Riemann Hypothesis, a problem unsolved for more than a century, a riddle that had defeated the brightest mathematicians alive. It was supposed to humiliate him, nothing more. But Ethan didn't back away. He closed his eyes. And then, slowly, he began. The first lines. The chalk scraped across the board with a hesitant screech. Ethan's first marks were clumsy, uncertain. He began not with the standard definitions Patterson expected, but with spirals, curves looping around imaginary axes, arrows pointing to sequences of primes. The class erupted in laughter. "Look, he's drawing doodles!" "Is this art class, Bennett?" But Ethan barely heard them. His breathing steadied, his vision narrowed until all he saw was the board. To him, the laughter was muffled, distant, like static on a broken radio. The numbers sang louder. He wrote faster now, his lines flowing with rhythm. He broke the primes into sequences, mapping them into oscillations, each connected like notes on a staff. He scribbled shorthand notations only he understood, then paused, circled patterns, and moved to a fresh section of the board. The laughter faltered. The silence. At first, students mocked him. Then they grew confused. Slowly, the room quieted. "Wait, what is he doing?" someone whispered. "That's not in the book." "Shut up, I think it's real." Ethan didn't hear them. He was somewhere else now. The board filled with layers, harmonic series twisting into spirals, gaps between primes linked by trigonometric waves. Ethan explained nothing aloud, but the logic in his mind was clear. The primes are not random. They are music. The hypothesis is the echo of that music, its hidden law. His hand flew so fast the chalk snapped again. He grabbed another piece without hesitation, never breaking rhythm. Patterson's change. Mr. Patterson had started with his familiar scowl, but as the board filled, the scowl loosened. His arms unfolded. He stepped closer. His eyes darted line to line, tracing the strange but undeniable structure. "This," he muttered, though no one heard. "This isn't nonsense." For years he had dismissed Ethan as a distraction, a boy too lost in his head. Now, watching, he felt a cold ripple of doubt. Could this be real? Could this boy, the one he had mocked, be seeing something no one else had? The flow inside Ethan's head, there was no doubt. The primes rose and fell like a melody. The zeta function stretched before him like a violin string, vibrating at perfect intervals. He felt the resonance of zeros aligning on the critical line, each one like a drumbeat in the music of infinity. His body faded away. There was no classroom, no teacher, no mocking laughter, only rhythm, only song. His hand was no longer his own. It was the bow of a violinist, the pen of a composer. When he finally stopped, his chest was heaving, sweat beading at his temples. He set the chalk down gently, as though laying an instrument to rest. The board was covered. No space remained untouched. Symbols, spirals, arrows, sequences, chaotic to the untrained eye, but in Ethan's mind, a perfect composition. He turned slowly. His voice was soft, trembling, but steady enough. It works. You just have to look at it differently." The reaction. Silence. The class, so quick to laugh, sat frozen. Eyes wide, jaws slack. Even the football players at the back who had thrown paper balls at him the day before stared as though they were seeing Ethan for the first time. Finally, one student whispered, "Holy crap." Another muttered, That looked real." Patterson cleared his throat, stepping to the board. His finger traced one of Ethan's spirals, then another. His lips moved silently as he checked the connections. He shook his head once, then twice, each time with greater disbelief. "This," his voice cracked, "this isn't standard. This isn't in any textbook, but the logic, dear God, the logic holds. At least for this case, it makes sense." Gasps rippled through the room. The impossible had just brushed against possibility. And it was Ethan Bennett, the fool of Lincoln High, who had dared to reach for it. Ethan's heart. Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor. He didn't smile. He didn't bask in glory. His chest was still tight, his palms damp. He wasn't thinking about recognition. He wasn't even sure he had convinced anyone. But he had done what he always longed for. He had shown the song. He had let the music of numbers leave the prison of his notebooks and sing aloud. For once, he wasn't invisible. Patterson's voice. "Class dismissed." The words snapped the students from their trance. Chairs scraped, backpacks rustled, but no one laughed anymore. They filed out quietly, stealing glances at Ethan as if he were a stranger. When the room emptied, Patterson turned to Ethan. For the first time, his voice lacked its sharp edge. "Bennett," he said slowly, Where did you learn this?" Ethan swallowed. His answer was simple. "I didn't. I just saw it." Patterson stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the board, at the impossible proof mapped in chalk. A boy had just shaken the foundations of mathematics in his classroom, and he hadn't even realized it. The aftermath begins. That night, Ethan would go home unchanged on the outside. Same quiet boy, same worn backpack, same weary parents waiting. But inside, something had shifted. A door had opened. He had dared to step into the light, and the world had seen him, not as a fool, but as something else entirely. The next morning, Lincoln High buzzed with whispers. Ethan had expected everything to go back to normal, mocking voices in the hallways, jokes whispered behind his back, crumpled papers tossed at his desk. That was the rhythm of his life, the melody of ridicule he had learned to endure. But when he walked into school, clutching his worn backpack and clutching his notebook like a shield, the melody had changed. Students stared at him, but not with sneers, with hesitation, with something like uncertainty. "Is that him?" a freshman whispered as Ethan passed. "Yeah, that's the kid who did, the math thing." "No way. Patterson set him up. He must have cheated." "Cheated on what? Nobody can cheat the Riemann thing." Ethan kept his head low, wishing he could fold himself into invisibility. But the silence was different this time. It wasn't mocking silence. It was wary, almost respectful. Almost. Patterson's unease. In room 214, Mr. Patterson sat at his desk, staring at a clean board. He had stayed late the night before, scrubbing every inch of chalk away, yet he could still see it. The spirals, the sequences, the strange proof that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. For years, he had prided himself on his sharp eye for nonsense. He had crushed cheaters, humiliated daydreamers, and pruned away false brilliance with the precision of a gardener cutting weeds. But yesterday, his shears had failed. Ethan Bennett. The boy he had mocked, ignored, written off as a fool, had filled his classroom with something Patterson didn't fully understand. And worse, it might be true. He rubbed his temples. He wanted to dismiss it as luck, as gibberish, but the patterns haunted him. In the quiet hours of dawn, he had opened his old university texts, tracing Ethan's spirals against established theories. To his horror, they aligned. Not perfectly, but with shocking elegance. "Good God," Patterson muttered, staring at his coffee. "What if I've been wrong all these years?" The rumor reaches higher. By Wednesday, the story had escaped Lincoln High. A younger teacher had mentioned it at a district meeting. "One of our students sketched something on the Riemann Hypothesis. You should have seen it." Another had whispered about it to a friend at the local university. By Thursday, Patterson received an email from Dr. Clara Nguyen, a professor of mathematics at the University of Michigan. "Mr. Patterson, I hear you may have a student demonstrating unusual insight into analytic number theory. I'd like to visit your class this Friday to observe. Please confirm." Patterson read the email twice, then again. His hand shook slightly as he typed a reply. Ethan at home. At home, Ethan remained oblivious to the magnitude of what he'd done. His parents noticed only small changes. "Teachers called today," his mother said, drying dishes. "Said you impressed them." Ethan flushed, staring at his notebook. It was nothing. His father, exhausted from the warehouse, raised an eyebrow. "Nothing? They said you were doing college math. Is that true?" I just saw it," Ethan mumbled. His father leaned back, sighing. "Son, I don't pretend to understand. But if this is real, maybe it's time people stopped calling you a fool." The words stung, not because of malice, because of truth. Even his own parents had doubted him. Ethan retreated to his room that night, scribbling furiously in his notebooks. The music of numbers was louder now, as though the chalkboard had unlocked something. But along with the melody came fear. What if the world saw him differently now? What if they demanded more than he could give? Friday. The professor arrives. Friday morning, room 214 filled with unusual tension. Students buzzed, whispering about the visitor. Mr. Patterson, unusually formal in his suit, stood stiffly at the door as Dr. Nguyen entered. She was small, sharp-eyed, with the calm authority of someone who had wrestled with the frontiers of mathematics for decades. Her presence alone silenced the room. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I hear one of you has a gift for seeing things differently." The students turned to Ethan. He froze, his face burning. Dr. Nguyen smiled at him. "Would you mind showing me your thought process?" Ethan looked to Patterson, who gave a stiff nod. His heart thudded. Slowly, shakily, he rose and walked to the board. The second performance. This time, he didn't hesitate. Ethan began to draw spirals again, mapping primes into rhythms, sketching the relationships as he felt them. His hand moved quickly, confidently. The chalk obeyed like an extension of his mind. Dr. Nguyen leaned forward, her brow furrowing, then lifting in astonishment. "Remarkable," she murmured. "He's not solving it in the classical sense, but this is a novel heuristic, an entirely new perspective." The class sat in stunned silence. For the first time in their lives, they were witnessing genius recognized by authority. Mr. Patterson's throat tightened. He wanted to apologize right then, but the words stuck. When Ethan finally lowered the chalk, Dr. Nguyen clapped softly. "Ethan, have you ever considered studying mathematics at the university level? You have a natural intuition. We could help nurture that." The room gasped. A professor inviting Ethan Bennett, the fool, into the world of higher mathematics. Ethan's face flushed crimson. I don't know. I just listen." Dr. Nguyen tilted her head. "Listen to what?" "The numbers," Ethan whispered. The class shivered. Shifting shadows. By the following week, everything had changed. The same students who had tripped him in the hallway now avoided his gaze, ashamed. A few tried awkward apologies. "Hey, Ethan, sorry, man. We were wrong about you." He only nodded, quiet. Others simply stared from afar, unsure how to approach him. The cruel nickname, Fool, vanished overnight. It was replaced with another, whispered in awe, the Prodigy. But Ethan didn't care for either. Titles meant nothing to him. Only the numbers mattered. Patterson's guilt. One evening, Patterson lingered after class. He watched Ethan pack his notebook slowly, carefully. "Bennett," he said softly. Ethan looked up, wary. "I owe you an apology." Patterson's voice cracked. "I underestimated you. I mocked you. I was wrong. You have a gift that I can barely begin to comprehend. And He paused, swallowing. "I hope you won't carry resentment for how I treated you." Ethan studied him for a moment, then shook his head gently. "I don't resent you, sir. I just wanted someone to see." The simplicity of the statement pierced Patterson's heart. For years he had prided himself on seeing talent. Yet he had been blind to the boy who needed it most. The quiet before recognition. In the days that followed, Ethan's life didn't become easier. Fame didn't erase loneliness. Recognition didn't erase scars. But something had changed in the air around him. People no longer saw a fool. They saw a possibility. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to hope. The letter arrived on a cold afternoon in March. Ethan found it waiting on the kitchen table, his mother staring at it as though it were a foreign object. The envelope bore the seal of the University of Michigan. His father sat at the counter, silent, his rough hands folded as though he were afraid to touch it. "Go on," his mother urged softly. Ethan tore the flap with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, its lines crisp and official. "We are pleased to inform you that, based on your extraordinary demonstration of mathematical intuition, you have been awarded a full scholarship to pursue studies in mathematics and theoretical sciences at the University of Michigan. We believe your insights could shape the future of analytic number theory." Ethan stopped reading. His eyes blurred with tears. He didn't fully understand the implications. Scholarships, universities, theories. But he knew this. For the first time, the world wanted him. The parents' realization. His father rose from the counter, crossing the small kitchen. His hands, calloused and trembling, rested on Ethan's shoulders. "Son," he said, voice breaking, "I used to think numbers wouldn't pay the rent. I was wrong. They've given you something more important than money. They've given you a voice." His mother pulled him into an embrace, tears wetting his hair. "I always knew you were special. I just didn't know how to see it." Ethan clutched the letter tightly, his chest aching with a mixture of joy and sorrow. For years he had whispered to numbers in the dark, alone. Now, finally, someone was listening. Whispers of fame. Within weeks, the news spread further. A local newspaper ran the headline, "High school student stuns professors with new approach to legendary math problem." Other outlets followed. University staff visited Lincoln High asking to see his notebooks. Reporters called his home, eager for interviews. Students who once mocked him now bragged, "I knew Ethan. We had class together." But Ethan remained unchanged. He still carried his battered notebooks, still scribbled spirals and primes in margins, still walked the halls quietly, head bowed. Fame meant little compared to the rhythm of numbers humming in his mind. The classmates' apologies. One afternoon in the cafeteria, a group of boys approached him, the same boys who had shoved him into lockers, who had called him fool so many times the name felt carved into his skin. They shifted uneasily, trays clutched in nervous hands. "Hey, Ethan," one began. We just wanted to say sorry for everything. We didn't know." Another added, "We thought you were weird. We didn't realize you were brilliant." Ethan looked up slowly. Their faces were red with shame. He thought of all the times they had laughed at him, the loneliness he had endured. The apology didn't erase it. But he didn't want vengeance. "I forgive you," he said softly. "But I was never doing it to prove you wrong. I just love the numbers." The boys exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Then one nodded, swallowing hard. "You're better than us, Ethan." "No," Ethan replied gently. "Just different." Patterson's redemption. The hardest apology came from Mr. Patterson. After class one day, he called Ethan to his desk. The room was empty, the chalkboard clean, but the memory of that day still lingered. "Bennett," Patterson began, his voice unsteady, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you respect. For years, I treated you as if you were a failure. I thought you were wasting your time. But you weren't wasting it. You were building something I couldn't see." He hesitated, eyes glistening. "Teachers are supposed to recognize talent. I failed you, and I will regret that for the rest of my career." Ethan studied him quietly. Patterson had been his harshest critic, his loudest doubter. But in this moment, he saw not arrogance, but humility. "I don't resent you," Ethan said. "You made me stand at the board that day. If you hadn't, maybe no one would know." Patterson blinked rapidly, overcome. "You're right. I challenged you to humiliate you. Instead, you taught me. Thank you, Ethan." For the first time, teacher and student shook hands, not as adversaries, but as equals. The university visit. When Ethan visited the University of Michigan campus, escorted by Dr. Nguyen, he felt like he had stepped into another world. The buildings were grand, the lecture halls filled with minds buzzing like his own. Professors treated him not as a boy, but as a peer, asking questions, studying his notebooks with reverence. "You have an intuition we can't teach," Dr. Nguyen told him. "With guidance, you could change the field." Ethan nodded shyly. He didn't crave titles or recognition. He only wanted to follow the song of the primes wherever it led. The last day at Lincoln High. Graduation came quickly. On the stage, when Ethan's name was called, The auditorium erupted in applause louder than any football game cheer. Students rose to their feet. Parents wiped tears. Even Patterson clapped until his hands stung. Ethan walked across the stage, his steps small and nervous, his diploma clutched tightly. For the first time, the applause wasn't mockery, it was admiration. And yet, as he sat down again, he thought not of the cheers, but of the numbers waiting in his notebook. They were his truest companions, his real home. The quiet ending. That night, after the celebrations, Ethan sat alone in his bedroom. The letter from the university lay on his desk. His notebooks surrounded him, pages filled with spirals, sequences, whispers of the infinite. He opened one and traced the patterns with his finger. The primes hummed softly, like a lullaby. He smiled, not because the world had finally seen him, but because the numbers never stopped singing. In the end, Ethan Bennett wasn't driven by fame or by the need to prove anyone wrong. He was driven by love, a love for the secret music hidden in the universe. And while the world would remember him as a prodigy, a genius, a miracle, Ethan would always remember himself as the quiet boy who once whispered in the dark, "Numbers talk to me,